What's up, everybody? My name is James McCool. I'm the owner of PaterTacos.io. Today is going to be the review stream for Week 16 of the NFL season. We do these every Tuesday. I actually missed last Tuesday because I was just far too busy with NBA to take some time to do a review stream, but we're going to get back on it this week. We're going to talk about Week 16. We're going to talk about my lineups in both GPPs and in cash games. We're going to talk about the models overall and kind of take a look at what the models thought and how things were looking over at PaterTacos.io. And then we're going to take a little bit of time to look at some subscriber lineups as well. Asked some subscribers to send me some lineups to look over in the community Discord, so we'll talk about those. If there are any viewers here that would like me to review one of their lineups, if you just tell me what your username was and if you entered the Millie Maker, then we'll go take a look at that one too. Or if you are in the community Discord as well and you didn't post your lineup there and you want it reviewed, go post that and then we'll talk about it. But first and foremost, I just wanted to kind of show off a cool new addition to the opportunity search tool over on the site. This is, of course, a free tool for NFL that will be maintained through the end of the season. If you guys have been using it, you already know that you can look at individual players and you can check their opportunity across the season. You can kind of look at what weeks they have boosted, what they have done when they have actually had opportunity, etc., etc. You can look at somebody like AJ Brown, and you can see kind of his ups and downs throughout the year. You can isolate individual stuff. If you just want to look at fantasy points through the year, you can do that. If you wanted to look at targets and fantasy points, you can do that. You can do all kind of different stuff. Then you can go over to the player comp. You can choose multiple different players to look at. So say that you wanted to look at AJ Brown next to Corey Davis. You can compare those players and you can see their graphs next to each other. So again, if you just wanted to isolate fantasy points, you can see that as of late, it's been mostly the Corey Davis show. Then you can go to the metric comp. So you can choose a metric to compare between multiple different players. Say that you wanted to look at AJ Brown and Corey Davis and maybe Jonnu Smith in targets. You can check that opportunity across the year. So that's a pretty cool thing that you can do. And then the new addition is this team comp. So you can take any team in the league and you can compare all of the players on that team based on a different metric. So if you wanted to compare targets for everybody on Minnesota across the year, you can do that. Or you can isolate based on position. So you can see the targets just specifically for wide receivers. You can see that Justin Jefferson has been the guy basically since the bye week. Adam Thielen has boosted him once, but not very often. Or you can check tight ends. And you can see that tight ends, Tyler Conklin has been somebody who has taken over since Kyle Rudolph has not been playing. So you can do this with say running backs, if you have a situation like Detroit, and you want to look at carries for running backs, you can do that. You can see that DeAndre Swift, once he came back, instantly took back over. But before that, it was the Adrian Peterson show over Kareem Johnson. This is a really cool addition. It's really, really good for showdown slates. Hopefully, I'm able to have something kind of like this for NBA, though I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do that. But you can utilize this really, really well for short slates in NFL if you plan on playing through the playoffs. Just wanted to point this out really quick. This is a new addition that has been put together over the last couple days. Hoot, you love it? Awesome. I think it's really cool. I'm really happy that I've been able to figure out how to put together web applications and do this kind of stuff because this is really, really fun, and I think that it just kind of supercharges the stuff that I have to offer. What did you miss, Mirko? You didn't. I pretty much just got into things. The only thing that you missed was me talking about the Patriot situation this year and how I thought Cam Newton was kind of in a situation where he was doomed from the start and just didn't really have the tools that he needed to be successful, because we were talking about it because I'm wearing a Patriots hat today. But you haven't missed anything in terms of reviewing the slate. I just talked about the new addition to the opportunity search tool, but again, this is being recorded, so this will be put up on the site later on this afternoon after we're done with the actual review anyway. So let us now really quick go through the models and kind of take a look at the things that the models really liked and some of the things that maybe the models didn't like that it maybe should have liked. overall, it saw Kansas City as like just the top, just like the fucking bee's knees. They projected 25, 26 points better than any other team on the slate. It was just going to be really, really hard for them to not project like God up against Atlanta. They ended up not actually putting up that good of a fantasy score. They were in a position to just be really, really good, and they squandered it for the most part. They were just like running Lev Bell into a wall of Atlanta defenders over and over again, and it's week 16. Like, shit happens. Teams are not playing at their full capacity. They're battling attrition. They're getting ready for the playoffs. It is what it is. So Kansas City projected as just like by far the best. After them, Chicago actually was the second best team. I didn't trust that, frankly. I didn't trust it. I talked about it of like not wanting to put a whole bunch of money on Chicago. And they ended up just like crushing. 40 plus real life points. In a really, really good spot, and they ended up just like dominating. So I didn't trust Chicago. That's on me. I should have trusted my models a little bit more, but they had the second best projection, so that worked out really, really well. After them, we had Baltimore, then Seattle, then Atlanta. Baltimore ended up doing really, really well as well. It was Lamar Jackson and Marquise Brown that ended up doing well, though, not Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews. So that was the combination that I was higher on. Ended up backfiring on me, but that's okay. Being on Baltimore overall was the right move. Seattle ended up being pretty bad. I think pretty bad. Like, we'll review my lineups here in a little while, but I did have a Rams and Seattle stack that ended up, like, obviously not doing well. Which it is what it is. Like, I really liked the Seattle game simply because Seattle versus the Rams, two competitive teams that are like destined for the playoffs, facing off against each other, where they have really talented players. And a lot of these games on this slate, like, looking at the Vegas stuff, a lot of the games on this slate were just like mostly trash for me, right? Like, I didn't want a lot of exposure to Cleveland. I didn't want a lot of exposure to Chicago. I didn't want a lot of exposure to Philadelphia. Like, that there were a lot of teams and a lot of games that just didn't really look like they were supposed to be competitive, and a lot of them weren't. Like, a lot of these games were blowouts, and then there were games that ended up going off. One of those games was Houston and Cincinnati. I talked a lot about Houston in the notes and in the recipe for success. I noted Houston as one of my favorite stacks of the week. They ended up doing very, very well. I ended up only having 3 lineups, so I didn't have any of them. I ended up with a Atlanta stack, a LA Rams stack, and actually a Denver stack, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we go into my lineups. But Houston was one of my favorite stacks of the week. I hope some people listened on that one because they did end up going off. I wrote about them at Line Movement as well. And then the last team that I wanted to mention really quick was the Chargers. So it wasn't a Denver stack that I had. It was a Charger stack. And after Keenan Allen got ruled out, Hunter Henry was out, like, they were just so fucking cheap. Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, and Donald Parham Jr., just like an ultra cheap stack. They had a 22% chance to 5x their salaries. Like, it was just a spot where I felt like with Denver being underpriced and with the Chargers being underpriced, it just allowed you to have whatever else you wanted outside of them. So I didn't mind going with them as a stack, especially in GPPs. Like, I knew that in cash games I had a pretty good idea of where I wanted to go and a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do in cash. So I felt fine taking some big risks in GPPs. I talked about not being on Pittsburgh last week. I stand by that. Ben Roethlisberger went in and like ate a whole bunch of steroid cereal and just like crushed in the second half, but he looked like trash in the first half, and he has looked like trash for the last like 5 games. I don't think that they're a competitive team at this point. They ended up having an incredible second half, but that was kind of out of nowhere based on the sample that we have had on them on this season. A couple other games. Dallas-Philadelphia, not a game that I was really on. I didn't really like any of the Dallas guys all that much. Jalen Hurts was somebody who was popular, and he had one really, really good touchdown to Deshaun Jackson. I ended up using Jalen Hurts in cash, but I didn't have any interest in GPPs. And with the Dallas side of things, I talked a lot about Michael Gallup, and Michael Gallup ended up just absolutely dominating. So did CeeDee Lamb. Dallas as a whole just kind of went off. So it was interesting to see kind of what happened with that game. 2 offenses that have just been way underperforming for most of the year ended up crushing. Outside of that, I don't think that I really missed on anything here. Cincinnati ended up doing pretty well. T. Higgins did well, but he projected well as well. Cleveland got trounced by the Jets, which is just fucking hilarious. Denver is bad, so that makes sense. Didn't really miss on too much. The models were pretty good this week. We'll go look at the overall ranges really quick and see where we were, sort of by ownership. So yeah, Tyreek Hill ended up not doing well. Jalen Hurts did well. Lamar Jackson did well. It's actually let's look at running backs and then wide receivers. So we're skipping out on quarterbacks. Austin Eckler ended up getting a touchdown, but was underperforming for the most part. Nick Chubb as well. David Montgomery did end up doing pretty well, so the model was on him. David Johnson did well. Happy about that projection. Melvin Gordon underproduced. Le'Veon Bell was a huge disappointment. So I was really, really high on Le'Veon Bell. Ended up just having a super inefficient outing. Got plenty of work, but ended up having just a really, really, really inefficient outing and kind of a floor game from him. So he got the work that I wanted him to get, but the offense just was not as high-powered as we wanted it to be. So when the offense is not potent, the running backs usually aren't either. Get on the list. I talked a lot about Jonathan Taylor being a pretty good play this week. He just wasn't highly enough owned, and I talked about him being about a fantasy point per touch guy, and if he's going to get the touches, he's going to end up producing. Probably the last guy that I was like high on that didn't do well was Daryl Henderson at 4,500. He was relatively highly owned, so I wasn't the only guy on him, but for the most part, I think running backs are pretty good. Overall, the models seem like they did pretty well. Not disappointed in any of them. So we'll go take a look at my lineups really quick. Show only mine. Drink some water real quick. All right. So I got fucked up this week, pretty obviously, and that's fine. I took some risks. It was week 16. I just kind of wanted to like really go out and not play very much of the like heavy chalk at all. I was on some chalky players, but the way that I put it together and the guys that I had around them were not. This lineup especially was like, I really, really liked the way this lineup came together. I really liked the way that this stack actually looked in theory, right? But in practice, it ended up sucking. And, it is what it is. Like, that's going to happen sometimes. So this is a Rams and Seattle game stack with Kareem Hunt and Lev Bell at running back. I also had a secondary correlation of Noah Fant and Mike Williams with the Texans defense. I think I had like 100% Texan defense. No, I had a Colts defense that ended up scoring 0 fantasy points. I just struck the fuck out on defense this week. I had the Texans defense in cash as well, which is hilarious. But this lineup, I was really, really high on Kareem Hunt and Le'Veon Bell. I thought they were both in positions where their skill sets would be used very, very well. I talked a lot about Le'Veon Bell being in a fantastic spot. A running back on the Chiefs is going to have a lot of opportunity to get work in the red zone. So Le'Veon Bell at his price, I thought with the work that he would have, he would be able to pay off that price. Ended up having a floor game. It is what it is. And then Kareem Hunt, I talked about the Cleveland Browns and their like loss of all of their wide receivers. It would have made sense for them to utilize Kareem Hunt more as a receiver. They've done it a lot this year so far. I think he's had like 35 or 36 snaps or something like that lined up at wide receiver and has plenty of targets. He is utilized as their receiving back most of the time. And it was just a terrible game plan from Cleveland. Stefanski came out and said that he was outcoached by fucking Adam Gase, which like you should just be fired at that point. But Kareem Hunt just ended up not being utilized the way that I thought that he would be utilized. It's one of the problems with trying to predict what coaches are going to do. But in a situation like that, I thought that it was necessary to try to make that prediction and try to take that edge, because if Kareem Hunt was used the way that he should have been used, his ceiling was massive on that spot. You sank on the Seattle Rams ship. Same, dude. Yeah, I mean, this lineup just got fucking crushed. The stack that I utilized was Jared Goff, Robert Woods, and Cooper Kupp, bringing it back with Tyler Lockett. Again, like I had said, in games where I think that it's going to be a shootout, that's when I want to use Tyler Lockett. He thrives when he has volume, and the only way that he's going to get volume is if they're in a passing script. So utilizing him coming back against a Ram stack, I just thought that the Ram stack made more sense than the Seattle stack, since I was mostly interested in Tyler Lockett. And it was cheaper, frankly. It was cheaper to stack up the Rams rather than the Seattle side. So if I thought this was going to be a shootout, stacking up the Rams makes sense. Bringing it back with Tyler Lockett. The secondary correlation of Noah Fant and Mike Williams was pretty obvious, I think. I talked a lot about Denver and the Chargers being way too cheap. Mike Williams especially was super cheap. Ended up only 10% owned, which is wild. I had 100% Mike Williams, I think. So very happy that he was only 10% owned, that I would have so much of him. Noah Fant, just, secondary correlation, taking advantage of the tight end so I don't have to punt tight end or take a one shot on it. That's something I always want to do. And then the Texans defense up against fucking Ryan fuck your bitch Finley and Cincinnati. Like, yeah, I had a lot of Texans defense. They were projected to be the highest owned defense, and I was fine with having that. I didn't really care because Cincinnati is so bad. But alas, they fucked me up pretty bad. This lineup is the Chargers-Bronco stack. So Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, and Mike Williams as a combination. Austin Eckler is obviously used enough in the passing game to where he can be utilized in a passing stack. So going with Herbert, Eckler, and Mike Williams was my preferred way to go. I brought it back with Jerry Judy, who I talked about Jerry Judy a little bit in the team notes, but he's been getting a lot of work. He's been getting a lot of the air yards. He's been getting plenty of the targets, and his price hasn't been going up at all. It's been going down because people haven't been utilizing him. People have been rostering guys like Tim Patrick and Noah Fant and not Jerry Judy because he hasn't had the results, but he's been having the air yards and he's been having the intent. So I really liked utilizing him. He was only 3% owned. This stack overall, Herbert at 5% owned, like, I love that. The way this came together made a lot of sense. It allowed me to utilize Austin Eckler, who was a chalky piece of the slate. Utilizing him in a stack with Jerry Judy and Justin Herbert meant that I didn't need to leverage anything else. I was already plenty unique in the way that I was going to be getting the points. My secondary stack was Russell Gage and Travis Kelce, and that was just like, that makes sense to me. I really liked the Kansas City and Atlanta passing environment. I talked about it as a game stack environment multiple times at multiple different sources. Russell Gage ended up not doing very well. It was like all Calvin Ridley. Any of the points scored and any of the movement came from Calvin Ridley for Atlanta. Game was exceptionally low scoring for having such a high total. Kansas City just really, really underperformed, which it is what it is. It's week 16. I'm not going to complain about that. But the secondary correlation of that just made a lot of sense. Travis Kelce was by far the best tight end on the slate. Just made a lot of sense. And then I also utilized Daryl Henderson Jr. in this lineup. He had 6.2 rushing yards. He did end up getting injured. He came back into the game. But obviously, the Rams only scored 9 points. Like, I used him as a way to kind of hedge the Rams-Seattle game. He was cheap, like 6.2 rushing yards. If he ends up having 2 targets and 2 catches and a touchdown, he ends up paying off really, really easily. He just did not do that. So it is what it is. And then this lineup, the one that did the best, was actually the Atlanta stack. Matt Ryan did fine. 2 passing touchdowns, 300 yards, -1 rushing yards, 22.9 fantasy points at 7% owned. I'm fine with that. Paired him with Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage, brought it back with Travis Kelce. This would have been hard to do if I didn't take advantage of Mike Williams and Jerry Judy as a secondary correlation, talking about that Denver environment that was just so cheap. It made a lot of sense to utilize those guys in another stack. I already talked about Kareem Hunt, Daryl Henderson, and then I used the Colts defense against Pittsburgh, saying, and just kind of doubling down on my thoughts that Pittsburgh is mostly washed. So those are my 3 GPP lineups. I talked about everything that I used in here in the team notes and in the recipe for success. I focused a lot on value. And like trying to take advantage of some spots that seemed just like grossly underpriced and had a lot of upside for what they were, especially if I was going to be trying to get as much exposure to Travis Kelce in that Kansas City situation as I could. It just made sense to take advantage of all the value that I possibly could. And then that Rams and Seattle game, I talked a lot about liking that game for the competitive nature of it, and it just wasn't that competitive. The Rams got outcoached, they got outplayed hard, so they didn't really have any answers for anything. It is what it is. Let's move on to cash now. My cash lineup is on the left. In my building blocks, I mentioned the main pairing of Daryl Henderson, Dave Montgomery, Le'Veon Bell, and T. Higgins. I think that I also had the Texans defense. We'll go see really quick. Yeah, okay. So the building blocks I mentioned were Daryl Henderson, Dave Montgomery, T. Higgins, Donald Parham Jr., Le'Veon Bell, and the Texans. The reason for all these things, is mentioned here in the building blocks. Top running backs to consider were Austin Eckler, Dave Montgomery, Daryl Henderson, Lev Bell, and Nick Chubb. The way that it was kind of put together, like when you looked at the amount of ownership that was going to be on players, it was just like glaringly obvious to me at that point that you had to take the value, that you really couldn't afford to pay up at running back because there were so many wide receivers and quarterbacks, frankly, that were expensive that you needed to have. The way that it was built out, like if you didn't pay down at 2 spots at running back with Daryl Henderson and Le'Veon Bell, you pretty much were not going to be able to fit the players that you needed to actually have a competitive ownership lineup, an ownership optimal. So I ended up going with this core. Ended up with Daryl Henderson, Dave Montgomery, Le'Veon Bell, Donald Parham Jr., T. Higgins, and the Texans. And the way that I filled around it was with Jalen Hurts. I had a kind of a question between Jalen Hurts and Mitch Trubisky, and I just can't use Mitch Trubisky in cash. Jalen Hurts has a lot of rushing upside, plenty of passing upside, so he was the way that I wanted to go with that at 7K. And then I had, my 2 wide receivers, whereas I kind of played around with an Allen Robinson build instead of Calvin Ridley. I kind of played around with a Tyreek Hill build instead of Calvin Ridley, but after it came down to it, I just kind of wanted to put together something with Calvin Ridley in that mid-range, being kind of the only guy, and knowing that with Kansas City being in the script that they should be in, it just made sense that Calvin Ridley was going to be like the main guy coming back. There are a lot of ways that Kansas City can get there. They can get there through Travis Kelce. They can get there through the running game. And I already had Le'Veon Bell. And then the other thing was that Tyreek Hill was talking about his hamstring before the game and was going to be monitored. So I didn't want exposure to that in cash. I ended up using Calvin Ridley and Brandon Cooks as my combination of wide receivers outside of the chalk. And it ended up doing pretty well. The main thing that killed me in cash, and like literally the only reason why I did not sweep cash games last week was the Texans defense. Texans defense with -4 fantasy points, literally not one sack, not one interception, not one fumble return, not anything. Just allowed 35 fucking fantasy or 35 real life points to the Cincinnati fucking Bengals. A lot of other people ended up having the Panthers defense in cash, which like, okay, sure. I mean, I can understand that against Washington, but I thought the Texans defense was in just as good of a spot, and defense just so fucking random that I didn't have any reason to care that much about what happened with my defense. I ended up doing very well in cash games. I think I ended up winning like 60 some odd percent of my head-to-heads. It was a very profitable week for cash games, so I don't mind, but I would have swept cash games and had a good week if the Texans defense ended up doing anything close to what the Panthers defense did. But Panthers defense ended up scoring a touchdown and crushing. So that might be my head-to-head. Kelton 94 binked Panthers D, but I felt Gordon, Montgomery, Eckler made the most sense with the cheap wide receiver, tight end, QB options, and ownership be damned was playing Le'Veon Bell. Yeah, that is your head-to-head actually, which is hilarious. Because I picked this one at random, so that's pretty hilarious. But yeah, ended up, I mean, Melvin Gordon, like, Le'Veon Bell just was a better play than Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon was an okay play, but like Le'Veon Bell getting all of the work on a team that is better offensively, and Le'Veon Bell was going to be higher owned. Just one of those things where like I'm going to play the higher owned one for sure, and most things just pointed to Le'Veon Bell being a better play. But outside of that, like I saw a lot of people on Laviska Shenault, and I didn't love that. He ended up getting bailed out by a touchdown, but Laviska Shenault ended up like beating me in a couple of head-to-heads. For the most part, though, like I caught some serious floor games here, and you did as well in your lineup as well with Melvin Gordon. But I caught some serious floor games from Daryl Henderson and from Le'Veon Bell and the Texans defense that like if those things don't happen, then I ended up having an even better week, and it was still a good week overall. But you had a good lineup. The only thing is, like, certainly going with Le'Veon Bell over Melvin Gordon, no matter the results. Like, Melvin Gordon on a team that is not good offensively against Le'Veon Bell with the expected same workload on a team that is good offensively, like, you definitely go with Le'Veon Bell in that spot. Okay, so let's go look at some subscriber lineups. So this is Hoot 3000. What's up, dude? Hope you're still watching the stream. So this lineup is Mitch Trubisky with Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney. He ended up not bringing it back with anybody. Doesn't look like. For shame. And I'm not bringing it back with anybody. But actually, I talked about that. You didn't really need to bring it back with anybody for Jacksonville. The running backs that he used were David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell. He ended up also utilizing Jamison Crowder and Austin Hooper in a secondary stack, along with Travis Kelce for a 2 tight end lineup in the Texans defense. So a couple things here. I really like the combination of Jamison Crowder and Austin Hooper. Some pretty sharp people that I know were on that. And the combination of Mitchell Trubisky with Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney is about the best that you can possibly do. Like I said, Chicago rated very, very well in the models. I didn't trust it, and that's on me. Who did trust it and ended up, probably getting paid a little bit for it. David Johnson was an awesome play. I talked about him getting a boost in opportunity, and I talked about it in the opportunity search tool as well and in my articles. David Johnson was somebody who for sure was getting good opportunity without Duke Johnson there and was priced well. His ownership was not going to be high enough for where he was priced. The 2 tight end lineup here, the only tight end that you can do this with is Travis Kelce. Just point blank, period. And even then, I probably would have preferred not Austin Hooper here and utilizing one of the very cheap Cleveland wide receivers. But it worked out. I can't be too mad at this. I think that it's fine to use 2 tight ends here since one of them is Travis Kelce. Because Travis Kelce is just wide receiver. And then the Texans defense did Texans defense things. But I like the correlation with David Johnson as well. So I don't really have any notes here. I agree that utilizing no Jacksonville wide receiver on the comeback, it makes sense in this spot because Jacksonville is just so fucking brutal and they're so bad. That there really wasn't any reason to do that. I've talked about that in the last couple weeks where when you have a team that is just so fucking bad offensively that you really don't need to have a bring back because there are likely other options that are going to outscore them. And you did that here with Jamison Crowder and Travis Kelce, and I think that was, Travis Kelce as a one-off along with Jamison Crowder and Austin Hooper. You wanted Lev David Mont. Yeah, I mean, that could have worked out fine. Actually, you could have had Lev Bell and David Montgomery if you didn't use Travis Kelce. I don't know if you realize that, but you could have done that, and that would have worked out fine. In fact, it would have scored higher than this, and you wouldn't have had a 2 tight end build. So did you consider that? If you didn't, maybe you should have. I understand that it's pretty easy to get tunnel vision, though. But overall, this is a pretty good lineup. Utilizing Jamison Crowder and Austin Hooper as a secondary stack, I think, is really, really smart. A lot of smart people that I know were on it. Like the Chicago stack, David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, good running backs to utilize. And then Travis Kelce is always a good bet. So, like the lineup. Let's go take a look at this one. This is Mr. Darksheep, resident person in the Discord, along with analyst and dude over at DFS Academy. I really like Darksheep. So he ended up going with a Seattle and LAR stack. Russell Wilson with DK Metcalf, brought it back with Robert Woods. He had Kareem Hunt and Le'Veon Bell as his running backs. He also utilized Deontay Johnson. No comeback. Donald Parham, no comeback. And Daryl Henderson Jr. with Robert Woods. I don't really understand this one. Mr. Darksheep, what were your thoughts on utilizing Robert Woods and Daryl Henderson together along with a Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf stack? I would like to hear your thoughts on that before I talk into it. Because I don't understand it, and I want to know if you understand it. Because if you don't understand it, then why did you do it? But I am interested here because you're a pretty smart guy, and I usually assume that you know what you're doing. I really do like the combination of Kareem Hunt and Le'Veon Bell for sure. They, were running backs that I liked a lot. Deontay Johnson as a one-off, I think, is okay. okay since Indianapolis. It's really, really difficult to end up having a comeback for Indianapolis. You know, you're kind of like forced into T.Y. Hilton or Michael Pittman, and you just run the touchdown roulette wheel, and you never actually know who's going to get the score. So Deontay Johnson is one-off, I think, is fine. The thing is that if you would have dropped down from Deontay Johnson down to, say, Jerry Judy, you probably would have had enough money to end up coming up off of Daryl Henderson. Or if you would have gone with Noah Fant and gone with Mike Williams instead of Deontay Johnson, you end up having a secondary correlation here instead of having multiple one-offs. Donald Parham Jr., I understand the one-off because he was just simply really, really cheap and filling into that role. But there were ways that you probably could have correlated this a little bit better. One of those ways was utilizing two Seattle wide receivers. So instead of Deontay Johnson, you could have used Tyler Lockett. Instead of Donald Parham Jr., you could have used Jacob Hollister. Russell Wilson does not run near as much as he used to. So utilizing him as a one-off, coming back with Robert Woods, and also utilizing Daryl Henderson, you had some pretty fucked up correlations here, my friend. You think it was late swap, so I can't say there was a good reason or know why I landed on either. For shame. That one's an actual for shame. It just goes to show, like, even good players like Dark Sheep end up putting together some weird lineups sometimes that, like, just kind of come together. And it's just, another lesson in looking at things and saying, oh, well, why did I come up on that? So this lineup, it's weird. Utilizing Daryl Henderson with Robert Woods against Russell Wilson doesn't really make a lot of sense. The only way that you could say that it makes sense is if the Rams end up going up pretty big on Seattle, and then utilizing Daryl Henderson in the second half. Maybe they got up big using Robert Woods, but with the way that the Rams play, Jared Goff, if Robert Woods ends up doing really well, usually it's because Jared Goff is in a passing mood, which means that another wide receiver is probably going to do well. So, like, there's a lot of things here where, like, the correlations and the game circumstances just don't make sense. I guess the biggest question I have is, in a 100-man contest like this, do you still feel like you need secondary correlations? Yeah, probably. It depends mostly, I think, on the way that your lineup is put together. Like, this lineup, going with Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf and bringing back Robert Woods, like, that in itself is not a bad idea. Because maybe you don't need that second wide receiver. Maybe you fill it in with more chalk. But going with Deontay Johnson by himself, going with Donald Parham by himself, like, you didn't even really get yourself anything special by going with Donald Parham by himself, Like, you were able to get DK Metcalf, but you were still kind of paying down at running back. You weren't able to get up to Austin Eckler or David Montgomery. The only reason why you're going to be utilizing these value one-offs is so that you can get up to the studs that everybody wants to pay for, and you didn't even really be able to achieve that with this lineup. So I think that in a 100-man contest, like, what you mostly want to do is kind of like take a cash game lineup and make one or two pivots, and this isn't really a cash game lineup. Like, you were missing out on some main cash game components. So I still think that the correlation is pretty important. Like, if you're building for any GPP, the correlations are going to be important because you want to have as good of chances as you can possibly have to actually winning the GPP and having your players do well. And the best way to do that is through correlations. You don't want to build up a parlay like this because you give yourself more things that need to happen for you to actually find any kind of relative success. So I would say that there are different ways to look at a 100-man contest. If what you're saying in terms of, like, not needing the secondary correlations, I can get behind that if that unlocks certain things from a cash game perspective for a lineup, like if it unlocked Dave Montgomery, or if it unlocked Austin Eckler, or if it unlocked Travis Kelce, like those kinds of things, then yeah, you can utilize some one-offs and prioritize those guys instead. But not being able to get up to those priority pieces and just kind of like putting together what is essentially just a player parlay here, that's something that I would still avoid in 100-man contests. In NFL, for that matter. Not for NBA or not for PGA or anything like that, but for NFL, where there are correlations that can make things a lot easier on you, you certainly want to take advantage of those unless they unlock something that is very valuable to you. And I don't see really anything in here that was like super valuable to you by not correlating on the secondaries here. Like, going with Noah Fant and Mike Williams instead of Deontay Johnson and Donald Parham, like, what do you really lose there? you don't really lose anything by making that choice instead of going with Deontay Johnson and Donald Parham. So I think that you can kind of like look back at this lineup and say, well, where could I have correlated? What did I really gain from not correlating things? And if the answer is you didn't really gain anything, then you should be correlating things. Just make your life easier. And with that, I think that's a really, really good time to end this review. Because I think that that's a really good point to make, is I think that people just kind of maybe should be thinking more about the decisions that they make in their lineups. And, we talked about with Hoot's lineup, he said that he wanted Le'Veon Bell and David Montgomery, and he literally could have had him. Like, he just didn't because he had a one-off of Travis Kelce. So this has been a good little teaching experience. I'm glad to review my lineups, glad to review the models. It was a pretty good week. And now we are going to get into NBA. So if you're not a subscriber over at paydirtghost.io, you should go subscribe. The NBA models have already been on fire. We've already been close to a couple binks. Last night was fantastic, so the price, it has risen up to $30 per month. Just know that. I'm going to be reaching out to subscribers of the site to make that change over to the new subscription price in the next couple days. But thank you guys so much for the support. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm going to go rerun some NBA models and get ready for the contest tonight. But thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys. Have a good day.